I grew up on the shores of Lake Victoria in Tanzania. My house was right on the shore, looked out over Lake Victoria and right over two islands. We called them Goat Island and Pig Island. And they were supposed to have wild animals on them, wild goats and wild pigs, but I ventured out there a lot and never saw wild animals on those islands. We used to spend the night, never saw any wild animals. So I don't know if those legends were true. The sunsets in front of our house were incredible. That's one of my favorite memories growing up, was the beautiful red sunsets, probably made even more beautiful by the smoke of the dinners being cooked in the village every single day. Now, my childhood was wildly different than a lot of people, but it was the same in a lot of ways too. For example, I loved Kool-Aid, loves Kool-Aid. I was like any other 6-year-old who loved Kool-Aid. And I thought everybody else would love Kool-Aid too. I thought that was just baked in to the recipe. It happened that my house lived right on the path between the village and the local water well, where everybody every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, would venture to the water well to pick up water. Why? Because they were thirsty, of course, right? So as a 6-year-old, I had my first product idea. I was going to sell Kool-Aid to all of these locals who were thirsty, walking to this local watering well. I knew I was going to be rich. This is a brilliant product idea. Everybody loves Kool-Aid. Everybody's thirsty. It's going to be great. So I got to work and I raided my parents' kitchen. And I raided the drawers, and they had Kool-Aid that had been sent to us overseas by the Par Avion mail that was very expensive. And I picked out some of those valuable Kool-Aid packets, and I got to work. I started mixing up the batch of Kool-Aid. Now, mind you, this was a brilliant business model because the cost to me were $0, right? The cost to my parents, maybe a little bit more, but the profitability off the charts, infinite, right? All profit. This is the economics of a tech unicorn. So I got to work. I went down to the beach right along the line where people would walk to get their water every single day, and I waited for my first customers. I saw my first customer coming down the beach on the path, and I yelled out to them in Swahili. I said, do you want any Kool-Aid? Unataka maji na sukari? And they got closer. And of course, they shook their head and said, hapana, hapana, hapana. No, I couldn't believe it. This was my first rejection. But chin up, no big deal, right? I could take that one. I knew there was going to be new prospects on the horizon. So I wait for the next prospect to come. I wait for the next person to come along. The next person starts walking along, and I see them, and they get a little bit closer, and I think to myself, okay, this is somebody who's going to buy some Kool-Aid from me. And sure enough, they seem interested. So I tell them the price. They say, how much? Begani. I tell them the price, 20 shillings. It's about 2 cents. It's the conversion. They laughed at me. It was outrageous, too expensive. Begali, it's too expensive. I couldn't believe it. This was my second rejection. I'm getting used to it at this point. But I knew I needed to change my strategy. I knew I needed to lower my prices. This was my first pivot. And I did. I lowered my prices. At this point, it's the equatorial sun. The sun is getting pretty hot. I'm getting a little bit sweaty. There's a jug of Kool-Aid sitting right next to me. So I, of course, pour myself a cup of Kool-Aid. This was my first overhead expense. After a while, my dad comes and checks on his 6-year-old son, and he orders a cup of Kool-Aid, and he actually pays for it. This was my first investor. It was a friends and family round, but it was my first investor. But at this point, the jug was getting a little bit lower. So I needed to go back up to my parents' house and fill it up. And so I opened the drawer, looked at the Kool-Aid, very valuable Kool-Aid, and said to myself, I'm not going to waste that. And so I filled up the jug of Kool-Aid, just kind of watered it down a little bit, right? Nobody's going to notice, of course. This was my first compromise on product quality. And before long, some of my friends came along. I poured them a cup. Some more friends came along. I drained the container. At the end of the day, I jingled a few coins in my pocket and went home. I was a little bit, depressed that I wasn't able to retire on my profits, of course. This was my first failed startup. So here's the deal. Most people agree on the formula for building products. There's some sort of idea that maybe you come up with, or your CEO comes up with, your company comes up with. They pass down the orders and you strategize, you architect some sort of idea around it. You design it, you code it, you build it, you launch it, you try to sell it, and eventually maybe you try to scale it. I'm here to tell you, maybe that's not the best way to build a product. Maybe there's a better way. If you approach building products like that, you tend to end up in a space where you're focused more on process. You're focused more on building the feature itself, and you've lost the meaning behind why you're doing that. And just like my Kool-Aid stand, you might end up with a watered down jug of Kool-Aid at the end of the day. Product quality is compromised and you're not super happy with it. So my job is building stuff people love. I've been doing this for a lot of companies over the years. I've had the opportunity to design and build products for companies large and small. And my passion is crafted pixels. It's designing stuff that is fun to use. It's very thoughtful experiences. I'm obsessed with helping those product companies then find product market fit. That's what drives me. I've had the opportunity to do it with a number of groups, but most recently I built, scaled, and launched LeadScout, my startup, and we eventually exited this last year. And I've been able to have the opportunity to work with a few other startups through that time, beyond that time, and even into today. All of those companies I've worked with have had very different processes. They've had very different teams, very different sets of skills on their teams, but they've all had a common thread. And that common thread, there's one specific thing that the ones that have the recipe for success, the ones that go on to get the millions of users and the 5 stars in app stores, they all have this one thing. They seem to intuitively understand it, at least. See, your number one task as a creator is actually not to build features. Your number one task as a creator is not to build features. That might seem counterintuitive. So what is it? Your number one task as a creator is to unlock the flow of value to your customers. So if you want to become a designer or a coder or a developer or a builder, a creator who means business, focus less on the feature building and the process and focus more on unlocking the flow of value to your customers. So I want to share with you my playbook for how I've done this in my own career. I've developed this playbook called my Speed to Value playbook over many years now, and working through startups, working through large organizations, and sometimes failing at times, but iterating and learning along the way. I've found that in adopting this playbook, I've been able to elevate myself at times from the role of designer into the boardroom, talking with executives and having a seat at the table in that situation. I've found that it's made the products I've worked on more successful. It's made the product teams that I've worked on more in sync. So I want to share that with you today, and here it is. So there's really 5 key steps to this playbook. Map the value. So spend time mapping the way that you provide value to your customers, or your business provides value to your customers. Number 2, dwell on the gaps within that map. So really dwell on that map and think about the gaps or the opportunities that exist within that map. Number 3, you need to align the flow of value Align the flow that you're trying to, the flow of value to the money of the business, the economics of the business. What's their lifeblood? If you can align the features you're working on with that, you'll be much more successful in bringing this to reality. Number 4 is you need to do small, little tests along the way. I'll call them MVTs. We'll talk about those more in a little bit. And number 5 is build hype, build traction before you even build. So this is my playbook. In 2015, my co-founder at LeadScout was moving from North Carolina back to Grand Rapids, or at least he wanted to. But the problem was he couldn't find a house. He specifically wanted to move back into a neighborhood that he had grown up in. And this neighborhood just didn't have any houses available. He could never find a house in this neighborhood. So one weekend he was visiting Grand Rapids, and he was frustrated by this process. And he decided to take a drive through this neighborhood. And on this drive, he saw some houses that looked appealing to him. So he got in his car and was driving through this neighborhood and saw a house over here that looked nice to him. And so he wrote a note, stuck it in the mailbox to that home. And they did the same, a few houses down. And eventually he put in about 20 notes into mailboxes. And then the days and the weeks following, believe it or not, people started to call and text him. And eventually he facilitated an off-market deal and got a house in that neighborhood. Didn't take too long. Now, he worked for a major roofing company, a roofing supplier. He was a sales rep for them. And he started to think about, how can I apply the same idea of putting notes in mailboxes in roofing to my own work? And he knew it would be some sort of software. He knew it would be some sort of app that would help him facilitate this, some sort of technology, but he didn't really quite know how. So he called me up and we started to riff on this idea together. Now, the first thing you might do is you might start to come up with a feature list, right? And start to develop some software on that. But we knew better. We knew that the first thing we needed to do was think about the value. So the first thing we did was, and this is the exercises, right? We created a flow diagram that started to map what we're trying to do and what value we're trying to provide to our customers, those contractors that want to get leads in neighborhoods that they're working in. So here's the exercise that you can kind of take home with you. Is the first step in this process is create that flow diagram. Think about whatever feature or product you're working on. What value are you actually offering at the end of the day with that feature? What are you trying to offer, right? Create that flow diagram, and we'll use it later. I'll unpack how we're going to use that. But let's look at a practical example real quick, something that we're all familiar with, Airbnb. What is the value that they're trying to bring to the world? I'll offer up is alternative to a hotel. Maybe at times a more affordable alternative, not always, but at times, especially when they started, a more affordable alternative. Maybe it's more space, right? Maybe it's a place you can cook, where you might not be able to do that at a hotel. So those are all end value for a company like Airbnb. So back to LeadScout, this was our value chain, right? A contractor would be driving through a neighborhood. They'd see a roof that needs to be replaced. And they might say, I want to get in touch with that homeowner and let them know that this roof needs to be replaced. So they would put a pin on the map, which would record an address. And then we could send a postcard on behalf of that contractor and facilitate a relationship with that homeowner. And that roofer could eventually sell them a new roof based on the issues they had in that home. This was the value chain of LeadScout. So we went out and built this. We built a small prototype that facilitated this value. Contractors driving down the street can put a pin on a map and send some mail. They can select some issues and send some mail. And we iterated on this idea. We eventually went to Chicago, facilitated some conversations here in Grand Rapids to try to get some investment. And we continued to build it. We eventually added a web app to support some of these interactions of tracking your mail and tracking your leads. We eventually got on some podcasts and went to some trade shows. And we added some tight USPS tracking, and we continued to iterate on this idea of mail to neighborhoods, even adding bulk mailing at times. And this is where a big break came. USLBM is the $3.6 billion company you've probably never heard of. They're a supply house for building supplies, and they deliver building supplies to hundreds of thousands of homes across the nation every single day. And they wanted to put LeadScout in the hands of all of their contractors across the nation. This is what it looked like for them. They asked us, hey, we know the address of all these homes because we're delivering supplies to homes that are getting their roofs replaced, the siding redone, driveways redone. Can you calculate the neighboring homes, 20 neighboring homes around those job sites? Can you calculate the addresses of those? Yes, of course we can. Can you send those neighboring homes postcards? Of course we can do that. Okay, can you do that on behalf of our contractors, putting their logos on these postcards and their messages like we're working in your neighborhood on these postcards? Yeah, we can do that. Fantastic. We want to run this program. We're going to put on every single invoice whenever somebody orders building supplies from us. There's going to be a checkbox, and they can check the box. And for an extra $20, they can send postcards to the neighbors. This was our big break. We knew it was going to be huge. We're going to be facilitated by their sales team. We're going to be delivered to countless contractors across the nation. And what was beautiful about this is if we go back to that map of value, we're taking out a big part of the lift of the contractor here. This is the roadblock to success here is, driving through a neighborhood and actually doing the work of finding those homes. And we're taking that completely out of the equation because we're just going to send mail to the neighboring homes, and that will get them leads. So we were really excited to see what this program did for us. And here were the results. Almost nothing. It was a complete failure, massive failure. You see, contractors just didn't see the value in the mail. So I'm getting ahead of myself here. They didn't see the value in the mail. They didn't want to spend that extra $20 on every single one of their invoices to buy mail. They weren't transmuting that into leads. You see, the story is almost always in between the lines. It's in the in-between spaces. And so this is why Mind the Gap is so important. So thinking back to the flow of value maybe you created in your head about the feature you're building, here's the next exercise. Really dwell on that flow of value, that map that you created. Dwell on the gaps in between. And think about the opportunities, maybe adding AI into something, right? Think about the gaps. Maybe you missed something. Let's go back to our example of Airbnb. Did we really get it right the first time? Are they an alternative to a hotel? Are they an extra space, an extra room? Are they a kitchen? Maybe. Sure, they're all those things. But maybe their value actually isn't so much those things. Maybe their value is more in being a resident in a home that is not your home and having that experience, right? It's like feeling that you're rooted in place. You're not just visiting Paris. You're waking up in somebody else's Paris, right? You can belong somewhere else, somewhere new, without actually being from there. That's the magic that they're delivering. And they deliver that through the host will give you personalized recommendations, the experiences that they offer. There's all sorts of ways that Airbnb does that. And that's their special value. That's the gap in between for them. So back to LeadScout. Here's our map of value. So if the customer doesn't value the mail, what do they value? It's the leads. This is what they want, right? So how are we facilitating leads? We really dwelled on that, and we thought about this really intensely. It happens actually here, the place we completely cut out of that first pilot. And it actually happens when they see a home that has issues, and they go and they knock on the door, and they talk to the homeowner. That's where the sale happens. At least that's where it starts. And then they put a pin on the map, and then the mail converts that lead down the road. So we poured all of our energy into this part of the process. We added additional features to our app to facilitate the relationship building at the door and the appointment setting and the process around that. activity at this point, it ticked up. We saw some life. We had actually unlocked some semblance of traction at this point. But there was still a problem. Our expenses were still too high as a business. Even though activity was up, additionally, our churn was still kind of ticking. These people that were in our application, they didn't know how to do the door knocking the most effective way they possibly could. They weren't great canvassers. They needed education around that. So they might use our app for a little bit, but then fall off and then come back and then fall off. So we had this churn problem. We needed to create sticky users. So this is where MVTs come in. First of all, let's talk about what an MVT is, because I think we're all familiar with what an MVP is, right? This is, as I would define it, it's the bare minimum for getting a feature set out there. You're kind of narrowing something into its core features. It's you're offering something that's targeted enough to offer value. Maybe it's technically feasible in a short-term amount of time. It's within a tight budget. That's the typical MVP, right? And of course, you grow that. It's what's beyond an MVP. It's a mature product that has a lot of bells and whistles attached to it. But what if we went we're going out here looking at a mature product, but what if we went the other way from an MVP? What if we thought about just the bare bones of what test can you run today to validate an idea, validate the value of an idea? And can you do it today with the resources you have in your pocket? So I'd encourage you to think about this like the mature idea is a restaurant, right? It's the full-fledged restaurant. The MVP is maybe you're leveraging a test kitchen to cook a meal. The MVT is, what do I have in the fridge to make a meal? It's something I can do right now, today, with the resources I have. So there's a little bit of a rubric to this that I use, at least. So MVT qualifiers, you can use this to answer, is something an MVT or not? And we'll run through a few examples of this as well. Does your MVT idea solve a core pain point? Okay, it has to solve a core pain point. Can you build it fast enough? And when I'm talking fast, I'm talking today, tomorrow, within a week. This isn't something that can take 6 months like all these MVPs that we build do. Do you have the ability to deliver it? Not just collectively. I'm saying, do you have the ability to deliver it? Do you have the capacity, the skill to do it? So if you're a developer and you need somebody to design something and you need to go hire that designer, that's ruled out. If you're a designer and you need somebody to code something, that's ruled out. How can you deliver it? Can you afford it? You're going to price yourself out if you start to rent a space to test your idea, or rent some sort of costly software to test your idea. Can it be monetized? Because this is important for later. You don't have to monetize it right away, but can it be monetized? These are all qualifiers of a good MVT. So in my work, I use this model with my clients at times. Right? And you start to see the progression. You're not meant to read these because they're too small, but you start to see the progression of, you can work backwards. If you look at a mature product, you can see how you could test some of those mature product ideas with MVT tests. And as you're building out an MVT structure, eventually that transmutes up into mature product features. So you can kind of workshop this and create a fully fledged vision of an application, but work backwards from that and come up with actual tests that you can test today. So Airbnb, let's use that example again. What did they do? Well, if you're not familiar with the story, they started because they couldn't afford their rents. It was Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia. They started Airbnb because they couldn't afford their rent. They were living in San Francisco, and San Francisco is also a busy conference town. So there was all sorts of people that were looking for places to stay, either couldn't afford hotels or just needed a place to stay because there's just nothing available. Maybe not even an affordability thing. So what did they do? They looked at their living room floor, which had space, and they had 2 blow-up air mattresses in the closet. They blew up those air mattresses, they put them on their living room floor, and they offered, in addition to just a place to sleep, they offered free breakfast. They offered two like-minded people to hang out with, right? Free Wi-Fi, and then, of course, the place to sleep. They didn't go rent a space and test it out as a hotel. They didn't build a bed or buy a new mattress. They used the resources they had and did it right away to test out the value of their idea. And if you've heard anything about Airbnb, I think they've done okay since that day. So back to how you can use this in your own lives. So you could work backwards. If you're building some sort of massive feature set or massive product right now, you can work backwards and say, well, is there an area of this idea right now that maybe I'm dwelling too much on the feature, I'm dwelling too much on the process and not enough on the value? Can I do some minimum value testing on this idea today? Or maybe you're just starting something. Think about how you can maybe not architect the whole thing, but do a small minimum value test. So LeadScout had another big break. We got a call from GAF Energy. Now, GAF is a massive shingle manufacturer. Maybe you've heard of them. If you haven't, you've probably seen their trucks that have GAF plastered all over the side of them and their shingles. And if you haven't heard of those, look around you. Any of the shingles you see in this vicinity are probably GAF shingles. Anyways, we got a call from their energy company, and they just launched a really innovative product called the GAF Integrated Solar Shingle. This came many years after Tesla launched their solar roof, and solar has been around forever, but theirs was very innovative, and it made a splash because it solved a few key problems. One, most of the time, solar, when you install it, traditional solar, when you install it on a roof, you put big bolts through the roof. And whenever you put a hole in a roof, eventually it leaks. So theirs was actually, as the name suggests, integrated into the shingle system. There's no sort of piercing of the sheathing underneath. They also have a massive contractor network because they're GAF manufacturing. They have a massive contractor network. So where Tesla was struggling to find people to install the Tesla roof, GAF had hundreds of thousands of contractors at their disposal, among a few other reasons why they had potential here. But what they didn't have is they didn't have the leads yet. So they contacted us, and they wanted us to put some specific pieces of information in our application for contractors to use to find solar leads. So if you're dealing with a solar sales rep, a lot of these folks go door to door. They'll knock on doors and ask you for 2 bits of information. They'll ask you for your utility bill, and they'll ask you, how's your sun exposure? They might not even ask you for the second one because they might be able to just see it. Solar reps are great at door knocking. We don't see it a lot here in Grand Rapids, but it is, if you're in Arizona or California, you'll see a ton of these guys beating down doors every single summer. So they wanted to take our app to these guys, putting that data into the app. So let's think about how an MVT would play into this. So we need these 2 bits of information. We need the electric bill. We need to understand the sun exposure. Well, the sun exposure, we can get that from something like Project Sunroof. The data is readily available. The utility data, it's a little bit harder to come by. You might need to work with utility companies, local municipalities to understand the regulations around solar. It's a little bit harder to come by that. So, a mature product, something that actually has this data baked into it, or just shows up for you, it's going to take quite a while to build that. You'd have to imagine working with all the municipalities across the country to integrate that data. It's going to take a while. So let's run it through this test. Okay, does having that data in the app, would it solve a core pain point? Of course it would for these solar reps. Is it fast to build? Absolutely not. It's going to take us a minimum of 6 months to get it out to, Michigan, let alone maybe just a segment of Michigan. Of course, the tech behind it's pretty fast to build, but the data is not. Is there a clear ability and path to deliver it? Not really. Who knows if Utah is even going to work with us, right? Maybe Michigan will, but Massachusetts won't. We don't know. Is it affordable? Probably not. The data is probably pretty expensive. Is it monetizable? Absolutely. We could probably figure out a way to do that. So let's think about an MVP. Well, if we can't get the data automatically and just load it in, what if we have the solar reps put it in? Well, that kind of defeats the whole purpose, right? Having them put in the data maybe would disincentivize them from even using it in the first place. So we can just kind of dismiss that, even though it adheres to some of these things, right? It just doesn't solve the core pain point. That would be what I'd call a watered down jug of Kool-Aid. Around the time I received a Nielsen survey in the mail, maybe some of you have received this, it comes with actual cash in the envelope. And they're asking for a survey of your experience, usually with a television ratings, or your viewing of television and TV programs. And some people, sure, they just pocket the cash and throw the letter in the mail. But there's a segment of the population that takes the cash, they fill out the survey, and they send it back in the paid-for envelope that's included as well. This inspired us. We thought about, well, what if we could do something like this to get the solar data that we really need? What if we could stuff a mailbox with a solar survey that asks questions like, are you interested in solar? What's your utility bill? What's the sun exposure on your roof? Maybe we don't even ask that third question because we can get that data from Project Sunroof. We send that mail to people in various vicinities of the contractors that we're working with that have good sun exposure on their roofs. And lo and behold, we get some of the data and put it in their LeadScout app. That was the idea we're playing around with our head. Does it solve a core pain point? Absolutely. Is it fast to build? We can start today. We can call some contractors. We can print out some surveys. We have cash in our wallets. We can go. We can do it right now. So there's that clear ability and path to deliver it as well, because we have all the resources on hand. We have our phone numbers in our contact book, and we can call those. We didn't need any other developers to help us build it. We had all the resources in-house. Is it affordable? Yes. For under $1,000, we could reach a few hundred homes. So we can definitely test this, right? And is it monetizable? Absolutely. We might spend $4 on every single survey. Contractors would be absolutely willing to spend up to $100 on a lead, a solar lead. And was it measurable? Of course. We could track every single QR code that we sent out, right? Or any single piece of mail, we could measure that. So we got to work right away. Here's my co-founder, Chris, in his living room, working with this is not child labor. They're his kids. Working with his kids to pack some envelopes for solar surveys. And the results were okay. It wasn't a complete failure. It was a pretty average success. The cost per lead ended up being about over $1,000. This is a little bit high for solar reps, but it wasn't unrealistic. So the cost per lead can be somewhere in that range depending on the quality of the lead. So it was okay. We made some revenue off of it, but more so our contractors just spent a lot of money sending mail with us. So the pilot kind of fizzled out for that reason. But some other things happened that we didn't expect in that process. We gained some great exposure. We got exposed to the solar door-to-door reps that were selling door-to-door and their behaviors. And we understood more about them and what they needed. And we got picked up by some influencers in the industry that started paying attention to what we were doing and latching onto it. And ultimately, that started to lead to some greater success. So there was still a problem, though. We were growing, but our expenses, if you remember those, at this point, they were burning us up. We were running out of cash as a business. So even though the activity was kind of churning along and we were slowly growing, it wasn't growing at the speed we needed to. We were running out of money. So we needed to do something. We need to do something fast. And this is where Moneyball comes in. Thus far, we've talked a lot about the customers, talked a lot about what they need. But there's a time when you really need to align what you're doing to the business. And this is really important. If you think about the example of Brad Pitt's his character in Moneyball, he was this big shot manager brought in by the Oakland A's to help them win. And he comes in and he says, I don't have enough money to do that. I need to get these players. I need a lot more money. I need these players to win. Give me more money. And the manager has to say, we just don't have it. We just don't have the budget for that. You have to figure out a different way. And so Brad Pitt's character had to adapt his approach, and he had to align it to what the Oakland A's could afford. So whether you like it or not, profit and loss statements rule business. Money rules business, right? So let's do a primer on P&Ls. This might be rudimentary, but we'll act like we're all 6-year-olds with a Kool-Aid stand here. All business operators are shackled to a P&L. At the top of the P&L is the revenue that you're making, right? So for example, my cup of Kool-Aid that I'm selling, I make $1 off of that cup of Kool-Aid. There's some cost of goods associated with that, right? You've got the Kool-Aid packet, you have the water that goes in the jug, and you have the cups that you're handing out to your customers. Those are the costs. What you get out of that is the profit. Okay, but it doesn't stop there, because there's the overhead expense of your handsome employees and your net income at the end of the day after you pay out all your overhead expenses. That's the basic primer on a P&L, and this is what rules business day in, day out. There's also some other things that are more intangibles. These are some things that I like to measure when I'm working with startups that really help gauge the pulse of a business. Things like signups and who's canceling, and there's maybe some other custom KPIs like how much mail is making it to the end of the delivery chain. And there's some other things that might measure your success, but at the end of the day, Moneyball rules everything. So when we think about Moneyball and how to apply it to your ideas, how are the features that you're working on aligning to and supporting the lifeblood of the business, the money flow of the business? If you can't do that, you got a short lifespan on the features that you're building. So let's think about how this was applying to our business. We had a few cost centers in our application, a few different major sources of revenue too. One major source of revenue was the postcards that we were sending. People would pay us to send postcards. Another source of revenue was the subscriptions to use our app. The postcards are high cost of goods, very high cost to produce, because you have to bring the postcard, the compositions to a printer, they print them out, there's postage, there's envelopes, there's this whole process for the postcards, right? So high cost there. We're not gaining a lot of profit over this too. So our customers are spending a lot, and we're retaining just a few cents on every postcard. Because they're spending, say, $1,000 with us, and $1,000 a month perhaps, they think they're spending a lot with LeadScout, and eventually they might look at that expense and say, not super interested in continuing to spend that. We haven't made very much money off of them, and they eventually say, it's too expensive, we're out, right? So it was high churn as well. And for us, it was a huge time commitment to manage all of these creative assets that needed to go with postcards. On the flip side, we had the subscription. Pretty low cost. Once you build the software, it kind of runs, and we just need to maintain it and continue to add features and value into it. But it's pretty low cost of goods to operate that. The profitability was pretty high on our subscription. And what we found was the churn of this door knocking product was pretty low. These are the economics of a software product. So we made a really hard decision. The original concept for our startup, sticking those personalized notes into mailboxes, we decided to cut that out of the business. It wasn't purely an economic decision. It was also tied to the fact that we weren't seeing the value. I showed you those pilots. We weren't seeing the value come out of it either. But economics certainly played into it as well. And we leaned in to being a door knocking service, enabling contractors to get leads at the door. And this changed everything for us. We started to see all of our customers leave. Now, mind you, a lot of these customers had been with us because they were interested in our mailing services. At this time, we also had people that were interested in us for the door knocking services. They kept growing, but not at the pace of the loss. So we saw month after month after month declining in user numbers until we had turned over our entire base, almost our entire user base, and it started to tick up. We were mortified in this part of the journey. We thought we were going to just be done and we were totally going to fail. But we trusted that we had made the right decision, and we were tuned into those metrics that I had told you about, and knew that by taking care of our mail customers, letting them know that we weren't serving them anymore, and taking care of our D2D customers, our door knocking customers, and letting them know that we were really investing in them, that we could turn it around. And that's exactly what happened. So once you find traction like that, it's important to build the hype machine. So if you want to get traction in the products that you're building, I would advise you to build traction even before you build. Let's talk about what that means. Talk about what you're building publicly. It's sometimes really hard to do, but just tell people about what you're building. It goes a long way. You can use wait lists to build exclusivity early on. So this is building a private club where only the people who've accepted the wait list are in. And release features in phases. This is a process that I follow where you slowly, incrementally go from inner circles to larger circles to beta releases to alpha releases, and with the capacity to pull stuff back on the way out. So we followed this practice at LeadScout. We built the hype machine by talking loud and being super present in our industry. We got on every single show we could possibly get on. We talked publicly on podcasts and interviews, on social media. We got some great traction. We started getting really heavily involved in our Facebook and our Instagram groups, talking about what we were doing. We weren't selling anything. We were just talking about what we were up to. And ultimately, this is the content strategy that we use. I won't go into detail on this, but this is a content strategy that I use for other clients as well, of just helping to educate people along the way. The waitlisting is a really powerful tool. You might have seen it. Probably see it all over the place, but you can launch a product without actually launching a product. But this is a really powerful way to capture intent and understand, are people even interested in my idea? So Superpower is a great product that launched a while ago. Before they ever launched, they had a wait list going. And maybe you're familiar with Work Louder and their physical products they launch, but they'll put out these ideas. It's just a rendering. They haven't even built it, right? And gauge interest for these products and then adapt along the way. Wait lists are incredibly powerful for building intent and understanding intent. And if you don't get anybody on your wait list, you might want to rethink what you're building, right? Inner circles are a really important part of building traction and building hype as well. So when you think about the people that you're working with, who can you pass your ideas to test out? Just a few people, doesn't have to be many, that are really close to you, that can tell you to turn back now or keep going. That's the inner circle piece. Once you get past the inner circle, you can have a broader group, somebody who's more in line with the customers that you're dealing with, right? Pass it to them, an alpha group, but always reserve the right to pull stuff back and completely trash it. And you see big examples of this at times. I use Figma a lot as a design tool. And Figma had an AI launch, big AI launch last year, completely failed. They pulled that back, right? And they'll probably launch it again in June. So we built an inner circle of a lot of contractors, and we passed features to them, and some of those features never saw the light of day after those inner circle releases. So the question is, really, how are you building hype for your ideas? This is a lot of times a hard thing for builders to do. We love to build. We don't like to build hype. But think about how you can talk publicly about what you're working on. So LeadScout, some numbers, pre and post pivot. This was us before we got rid of mail out of our service and really leaned into the metrics that we knew were working. And so we started to really increase the number of customers that we had. Our recurring revenue went up. The lifetime value of our customers, the amount were willing to spend with us, went up. The cost of acquisition actually went down because there was more word of mouth flowing and people understood what we were working on. So that went down. And this is a great metric. I love this, is we were enabling our customers to be more powerful than ever at the door. So the number of doors skyrocketed up to about 175K a month last time I checked. This is one of my favorites. Weekly activity, you'd have this like trend of people were active and they kind of die off. After we really leaned into the pivot, weekly activity was up. We had a retention rate of people would log in. There's about 8 out of every 10 people would log in every single week and use our application. And 5-star reviews across our App Store, Android App Store, and Capterra, and all the other places online really skyrocketed as well. So it's always so validating as a creator to start seeing your thing in public and seeing those positive reviews come in. One more thing on this point actually is before that time, we spent maybe 2-3 years with just a few reviews. And that always pained me. I was like, we need more public reviews, more validation that what we're doing is working. And so it was really validating to see like continued reviews hit. And the best feeling is when people get locked out of your app. You lock them out after a free trial, and they get mad at you for doing that. That's the best feeling when you build a product. We would ask people too, how they do it. How are they successful? I've always loved Enrique's reply here. It's like, it's ass out here, but we got to keep striving. So what did Joe's six-year-old Joe, what did his Kool-Aid business get wrong? Well, I don't think I was really tuned into my speed to value playbook at that point in my life. I wasn't really thinking about the value I was providing. I didn't map that out. I didn't spend any sort of time before I started. I certainly wasn't thinking about what was I missing. I didn't think about the economics of this Kool-Aid stand. I didn't think about the price points. I certainly didn't go down to the market the day before and hand out little glasses of Kool-Aid to test out if people would even be interested, right? And I certainly didn't, put up billboards or let people know, handing out, little coupons or anything the day before of what I was up to. So I wasn't really building hype around this idea. But hey, I was 6 years old. So, it is what it is. There are some side effects to following this playbook, though, that I've seen in my life, and I think that you all could see as well. If you do this, you will have more people buy into your ideas. You're going to be building a lot more traction. You will be elevated to have a seat at the table more often within your businesses and within your client relationships. You're going to get a lot of great examples of work that's actually made it to market, gained traction, and had lots of 5-star reviews and lots of users adopt it. So you're going to have that for your portfolio, and your client engagements might actually end up going beyond a few weeks into months and years, and they might actually be client engagements that you really love. So those are all side effects you should be warned about of following this playbook. So that is my presentation. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you all coming out tonight. And I would be remiss to say too, like this space, thank you for Jordan for hosting this. Here's some information on the space. It is a co-working space. If you ever want to join, grab a desk. I work out of here. It's an awesome vibe in here every single day. So thanks for coming tonight. I really appreciate it.